Hello, I'm Des Dearlove and welcome to the Thinkers50 from the Fox Club in London's Piccadilly. My guest today is Fons Trompenaars. Fons is one of the world's leading experts on cross-cultural management and leadership. He wrote one of the seminal books on the subject, Riding the Waves of Culture, which is now in its third edition. Fons was also in the original 2001 Thinkers50, and I'm pleased to say that he's in the 2011 edition of the Thinkers50 at number 42. Fons, welcome.
Thank you, Des. A pleasure to be here.
So Riding the Waves of Culture, I mean, it was a huge success. I remember writing about it. I was writing for the Times at the time. I remember writing a piece about it. There was an enormous interest. Why was there that hunger, that thirst for the subject at that time?
I think that it was the first time that a book was published that made the translation to what does it mean for management. There are other models, there are alternative models, they're okay. I think our model is quite okay too, but it's really the translation into what it makes for a manager. What can I do with it? And perhaps in the beginning it was more for HR, but generally we went into leadership. And what does it mean for leaders? Because you see that the world has changed from, let's say, multi-locality. You prepare yourself for Singapore, you prepare yourself for America. Nowadays, you hardly see that. It's people going to America, but by the way, we have to deal with Mexicans, with Canadians, with Argentinians and Venezuelans. So it's much more about leadership across cultures rather than preparing for a nation.
And back then to this gentleman, Gert Hofstede, of course, was the name that everybody knew. How was your thinking different to his?
I think we got some alternative models. I started with Hofstede and the professors at Wharton said, why those 4 dimensions? In fact, I went back with that question to Hofstede, who didn't have the answer either. But okay, it happens, so I developed my own model. So that's one difference. And I have 7 dimensions, not that that makes the big difference, but it's a difference. I think the main difference is not so much about the model. You can have arguments pro and con, but it is what do you do with the differences? And that it was wonderful to meet Charles Hampden-Turner, my co-author, or I was very often co-author of his. And the beauty of Charles is that he introduced dilemma management. Once you recognize cultural differences, and a lot of work is about recognition, if you respect those differences, they turn into dilemmas. And the real issue for people in business is, okay, I know there are differences, I respect them, but what do I do? And that means you need to manage dilemmas.
When you look at the world today, when we look at the world today, there's a sense with globalization that there's a sort of a homogenization, a harmonization of cultures. Are cultures as different as they used to be?
Yes and no. You see that standardization, homogenization also invites for more difference. If you take Europe, we have the introduction of the euro, and the English feel even more English. So it's kind of interesting. The more we homogenize, the more we want to be different. And I very often use the pendulum as a way of reflecting that. The more it swings at the bottom, the more it needs a nail to hold it together. However, if you make the nail as big as the pendulum, people start to get desperate and they want the swing. People are different. And it also shows in our database, in the research we done. In some levels we homogenize in order to allow for differences in other levels.
Can you give me an example of that?
No, the pizza is the most obvious one. You homogenize the cake on which you do different toppings. Now take that as a metaphor. In organizations, you have global organizations, and they are still there, that want to have one culture worldwide and everything is detailed and codified into every aspect of the doing. Then you have the multi-local organization where there are different activities with different, let's say, operational modes across cultures. And there is, I think, and that's where we're going to, the transcultural organization. The transcultural organization knows exactly what to share in order to allow for more differences. So, for example, you might say, we as a company want to reward high performance. The way high performance is defined and how we reward, we leave it up to the country. But it's all based on high performance. It's also true with values. There are certain values that we say, like integrity, We believe in integrity, but integrity is seen differently in America than in parts of Europe or in Asia. So the idea again is that successful organizations know what they share and homogenize in order to allow for different interpretations. And that works well.
You mentioned different corporate cultures as well as national cultures, because this is the interesting stuff where these things come to play. One of the things for me in the book that was so influential was the 4 models of the corporate cultures. Can you talk us through that? The incubator, the guided missile, the Eiffel Tower?
It's based on 2 major, let's say, dilemmas. On the one hand, the hierarchical, on the other hand, the egalitarian type of interpretation of relationships. And on the other axis, we have the more formal task-oriented and the more informal person-oriented. Now, if you combine those 2 axes, the famous consultant trick, is you get 4 types. So on the one hand, you have, let's say, the Anglo-Saxon model. It's, at least in ideology, egalitarian, combined with task orientation. We call that the guided missile. Guided missile is based on strategy, management by objectives, pay for performance, you know, all the MBA stuff that we are taught every day. That model is contradicted by the opposite, and we have the hierarchical, more person-oriented culture, which we call the family. And the family is based on who do you know rather than what do you know. Management by, if you like, a relationship, it's management by subjectives. And finally, what motivates people there is the accumulation of power. Then we have the combination of hierarchy, but more task and function oriented. It's what we call the Germanic model, which is the Eiffel Tower. Eiffel because it sounds German and it's steep, has a lot of structure. It's based on structure, management by job description. And what motivates people in the Eiffel Tower is the accumulation of expertise. That's why in Germany the symbol of that is having a title. And still in business they use titles. Then we have the incubator, which is egalitarian and person-oriented. If you like, Silicon Valley, parts of Scandinavia, which is in fact based on organized chaos. You manage by passion. People are just passionate about what they do. They call their salary the monthly insult. But they say, I stay because I learn. So the motivational principle is learning. Now, what we have done in our work is to combine those interpretations of corporate culture into what we call national culture. How does national culture affect those corporate cultures? The recent developments in what we do in this field is a big change in many things we do. And that is what my wonderful colleague Charles Hampden-Turner calls get away from the cookie cutter. And the cookie cutter is, okay, we have 4 pieces of cake. Now we developed a questionnaire on the same principle, but you can score high on every 4 of the quadrants. Because the quadrants, if we start with the guided missile, it's the strategic component. Has your company covered the strategic component? Then we go to the Eiffel Tower, and it's the execution component. We go to the family component, which is the relationship and if you like, commitment type of component. And then we have the creativity and flexibility, the incubator. We have now developed a questionnaire where you can score high on all 4, assuming that especially in the crossings, you have reconciled the dilemma. And we also seen that in innovative companies, you go through the stages. You start with the incubator, 2 people with a great idea, like Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Yeah? But it grows and it gets into a crisis, which is called by Greiner the leadership crisis. Then you need the family culture. But the family includes the incubator. The family grows, it gets into the crisis of autonomy, so you need the guided missile. It grows and it gets into the crisis of control. It needs the Eiffel Tower for execution and stability. And then finally, it goes back into the incubator. That infinity loop is an integration of all cultures and will support with growth the innovation of organizations. What we have found, and that's the last one, is to be innovative, you now need to take a 5th step that's called exnovation. You have to go outside of the company in order to be innovative. Combine business models and try to combine partners outside of your industry. And that is a bit the latest work we have done around corporate culture.
Oh, that's very interesting. So where would something like Facebook, where is that in your kind of worldview?
again, you will see they go, and Larry Greiner has done that in Harvard Business Review a couple of times. In fact, he wrote 2 articles in 72 and in 98 with the same title, The Evolutionary Growth of Organizations. And it's amazing. He only added this ex-novation chapter. But if we put that model on Facebook, I still think Facebook is in its initial phases. It's less mature than Google, and it's still seen as doubtful if it will go through the first crisis, because it has been a hype. You already see now with the stocks that it's going down. Obviously it will play a role, but it will depend on if they go through the leadership crisis, namely if they grow so fast that it needs a stabilization that I haven't found yet in Facebook. But once it goes through there, and it will come, you know, in 5 years' time, Facebook will look so differently. Because at the moment, most people do it because it's fashionable, but what a crap is on there, you know. It is just amazing how people make the lemming type of behavior real. You go on Facebook because everybody's on Facebook. But it still needs to mature. Who knows what will come out? The main issue is leadership. Will the leaders, like Larry Page and Sergey Brin were able to do through the help of Schmidt, it might perhaps need that kind of leadership to go through the next crisis.
You talk a lot about reconciling dilemmas. It sort of underpins all of your work, and it's the backdrop really to what you're going to do with this stuff, this cultural stuff. What sort of dilemmas are you thinking about, and are those dilemmas changing, and what can organizations do to tackle them?
Yes, at the moment we're working on a new book, and the book has a working title From CO2 to CO5, because we believe that the next fashion is coming. We had the fashion of efficiency and effectiveness, and that's called scientific management at the beginning of last century. Then we had the next fashion, which was by an accident the Hawthorne experiment. Everything was motivating people. And so you got Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, all these theories of motivation, X and Y and what have you, and it killed itself like the first one did by exaggeration. Then you got the next exaggeration, which was called focus on clients, marketing, you know, 60s, everything was marketing and sales, killed itself by exaggeration. The next exaggeration was shareholder value. You remember I wrote an article in the Financial Times with the title, Shareholder Value, the value created for people who never share. And I was predicting it would kill itself, like the next fashion that is coming, corporate social responsibility. It will kill itself. Why? Because every value of any stakeholder you represent is only one way of looking at things, and if you do it at the cost of other values, it's not sustainable. I'm not against society. I'm not against shareholders. I'm not against clients, neither employees and efficiency. The issue is, and that's what our last book is about, coming back to your question, it is the dilemmas created between the stakeholders. So we have now, out of 18,000 dilemmas, selected the top 10. Let me give you some examples. And they are always between stakeholders. Developing people versus cost consciousness. If you go for cost, you don't develop your people. If you go and develop your people, you can't be cost conscious. How do you reconcile that? Equal opportunities versus positive discrimination. If you go for one or the other, it's not sustainable. You need to combine. Serve what your customer wants versus follow what society tells you. If you are PepsiCo and you are into snacks and sugared water because the customer wants it, it's not sustainable. If you go for the law and says, oh, we have to be careful about health, it's not sustainable for PepsiCo. You need to combine the two. Global versus local. These type of dilemmas between stakeholders are the ones that we encounter most, and we help clients to do so on 3 levels. What are your dilemmas? What is the competence of your company to deal with those dilemmas, of your leadership in fact? And how does the corporate culture give you a context in which you serve those dilemmas? And that is our latest book, where we will show best and worst practices on let's say, the 10 golden dilemmas. and what companies could do to increase their effectiveness on dealing with those dilemmas.
Now, Fons, there's a lot of doom and gloom around, especially in Europe at the moment. Are you optimistic about the future?
It's difficult to say. I think, again, like most of these things, it depends on leaders, in this case, in politics. I'm optimistic by nature, and I think Europe has so much to offer. Also, there's a lot of complaint, which is part of Europe as well. I think we have really been so well the last 40 years. After the war, we first of all didn't have too many wars. We had some little ones, but it was still captured in a region. We have done enormous economic success. I think Europe has, in many ways, even competed and won from the US. If you take the car industry, high-tech's perhaps less, but we are good followers. Plus the quality of life. I mean, if you add that up, still Europe, and I include the UK, is something that is a wonderful success story. And we keep on complaining. You know, we're talking about a crisis. Now, obviously there are people who are affected by this crisis. I think Europe has a mental crisis, not a financial crisis. And we need to develop a certain approach. First of all, be proud of what we do. Keep the diversity and take advantage of it, and don't harmonize everything, or harmonize or homogenize everything. Try to find what things do we need to share in order to allow to flourish the diversity. And then I'm very optimistic about Europe.
Final question. You were in the original Thinkers50. What does it mean to be in the Thinkers50, the 2011 list you were in it? What does it mean to you?
It means a lot to me. First of all, recognition of this type of work is always appreciated. And to be honest, I think Thinkers50 is one of the few labeled, branded institutions that have done a great job over the last 10 years to at least, let's say, categorize some of the thinkers in certain fields. And you have extended also the criteria according to which you measure. And that does great stuff. I don't know any other type of list. So I'm very proud to be on there, and thanks for the good work. However, I also think there comes a responsibility with that, and that Thinkers50 should extend its services, apart from labeling and voting, into delivery in digital media, in leadership development, and take advantage of the fact that you're pretty critical about labeling the quality, because don't forget, there's a lot of crap out there too. So it's wonderful to be part of that success story. Thank you very much.
Watch this space. Fons Trompenaars, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.